Are you having hip pain and back pain? Well, in this video, I'm going to cover how hip impingement can create some issues with your back and even can travel further on down your leg. I'm Sebastian. I'm part of the locally world-famous chiropractors in Costa Mesa, California. We're going to cover this from simple terms today, and I'll give you an example of a case presentation that we had that we were successfully able to rehabilitate using this reverse engineering approach. Now consider that a lot of people with hip problems will precede the back problem that we mentioned. It's important to note that hip impingement or hip pathology on its own cannot create leg symptoms. Let me repeat that. Numbness, tingling, stabbing, shooting, pain that goes below the knee in any way, shape, or fashion cannot reasonably come from hip impingement. But that doesn't mean that hip impingement or lack of hip function can't create a cascade of events that create that problem. Generally, symptoms past the knee is usually more we call radicular, or it's spinal referred, or there's some type of nerve root impingement. Now, one of the cases we had recently was we did have a gentleman with a very long past history of hip pain. Actually, it was about 20 years ago. He had a large hip injury, and he was actually not able to fully bear weight on his leg for about, I think it was about 8 months. So he was hobbling around for 8 months, not being able to fully use this hip. Now, if you take a look at my spine here, you can see that I'm kind of dodging and weaving side to side. A limp, obviously I'm going to be walking on my feet, a limp not only offloads the hip because it's trying to protect the hip, but it can create other ambient movements as you're trying to normally walk, which can create back pain or referred pain down to the leg. This gentleman, although he had this a long time ago, he actually still showed signs of having the hip not functioning well, even though the hip no longer hurt. Let me explain. A lot of times at performance-based performance tests, it's called squats test. And so we have them put their feet shoulder width and toes facing us, not lifting the heels off the floor. So the feet are literally glued to the floor. We have them do what we call a prisoner squat, where your hands are behind your head. You won't see it in this picture until I get down here, and we just have them squat down. Now in this scenario, say we have this quote-unquote weak hip, and this person is now shifting weight away from this side, essentially getting down to a position where the hip should acquire load, but it says, you haven't used me in a while, I'm just going to help you out and push it over to the other side. Now, he showed signs of that. He showed signs that he wasn't using his hip well. In range of motion testing of his hip, which we put him on his back and we checked the range of that hip, there was no reason to not get his hip to do work again. Let me rephrase that. A lot of times, people will shift weight away from the side of a hip issue. If it's currently, say, a hip fracture, you shouldn't load it again, yet. Later, but not yet. There's a reason why you're shifting weight away. In this case, he had what we call a non-painful dysfunctional hip. The hip wasn't functioning, it didn't hurt, but it created symptoms that were a cascade of events. The way to reverse engineer this is to settle his symptoms, give him something that's helpful for his nerve pain, which we did. By the way, give him something. We didn't give him medication. We gave him an exercise to do. And then we reloaded the hip, and I'll show you how we did that for him. Now this exercise, this one is called an accordion. We've showed it on some of our other videos. To be clear, a lot of the exercises that we use, they're similar exercises you might have noticed in our videos, but we coach them differently based upon the scenario that we're looking at. Also, think of these exercises, the corrective exercises, as a spice. You add spices to certain dishes while other ones you don't. You don't add it to every single dish. You put them all together and you get the best meal that you've ever had in your life. But you put them together wrong, things don't go well. And that's why this is our form of movement medication. And so this accordion is simple. You set up just like this. You attach accordion to the hand and hand and knee, and you start to squish them together and sink to the floor like you're trying to be creepy. So here and here. Now, some people with current hip impingement that we shouldn't be loading would say, my hip hurts right now. We can mitigate this a little bit by bringing the knee further away from the chest. Since we know that these are the positive tests that they'll find in a hip flex position, we'll bring the knee away from the chest, essentially doing like a version of a side plank. The cue that we typically use is push the knee into the floor, all right? And same thing goes here. We don't want a side plank. We want a game called push the knee into the floor, which will load the hip in a favorable way. Eventually, we'll start to add this hip flex position. It just can't acquire it at the moment. So we took this gentleman through that exercise, and actually when he squatted down the next time, he actually shifted into the side of the old dysfunctional hip, which tells us that the exercise did its job. He actually felt better about 2 weeks after, not fully better, but he was definitely improving. So if you guys are looking for a comprehensive approach to decreasing the amount of leg pain, sciatica, low back pain, and hip impingement, doing it in this process where you take a lot of information and then boil it down into specific spices to put into the rehabilitation program, you can always reach out to us. We have things that we can give you, but we need to know more about you and your case before we actually just randomly give you stuff. The exercises, there's other exercises that we show in the webinar. We have a hip webinar. It's 20 minutes long. It covers impingement, hip flexor syndrome, labral tears, sports hernias, many, many different types of hip conditions that you might have heard about, but you want to learn more about. And so very good use of your time if you would take advantage of that. Subscribe to the channel. You can always work with us directly virtually or in person. We see a lot of these hip conditions virtually, and things go very, very well. Check out the reviews on our Google page. Most of them, I'd say near all of them, are 5 stars. And so we'd love to work with you. Subscribe to the channel. We'll see you guys next time.